Hey, everybody. Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. Man, boxing one weekend, boxing the next weekend, boxing the other week. I got to tell you, boxing is dead. Boxing dead. It's dead, bro. Man, we're here to talk some boxing.
Over 100 years, my man.
Over 100 years, fools have been saying boxing is dead. I am here with my dude Aris Pina, CompuBox operator, fellow fight maniac and historian. How you doing, bro? There's a lot of boxing last night.
Still hyped from last night, man. Last night was absolutely awesome.
Are you like hung over from all that shit last night? I am. Damn.
Kind of, but for probably a different reason than other people, and it wasn't from drinking. I'll put it that way. All right, it wasn't. It was I was working the Triller card last night, and let's say there was a few complications.
It was a night. It was a fight card.
I made it last a little bit longer than I intended my night to be, but that's probably why I'm a little tired and hungover today. That why.
Yeah. That's what I meant too. It was like just copious boxing throughout the day for the most part, but just especially it was a long night, especially for you, dude. It was a long night for me, and I'm on the West Coast. You're on the East Coast, bro. You were hurting.
I was wired from gearing to go in the zone from 7 p.m. All right. And the Triller show didn't end until probably a little after 1:30, 1:40. I mean, close to 2 a.m. or so.
Yeah, it was almost 2, man. It was rough stuff.
I mean, at least I was able to catch the fight we're here to talk about today, the epic rematch between Jermell Charlo and Brian Castaño without any interruption. So that was a bonus, but yeah, it was a long night for you, boy.
Yeah, bro. You deserve like a break, a cookie, a drink, whatever the case may be. You deserve it for sure, working that card. And I mean, honestly, we talked about all the kind of a brief history of the junior middleweight division, or at least the junior middleweight unifications and stuff like that before the first Charlo Castaño fight. That fight wound up a draw last year, but it was a great fight. Definitely one of the fights of the year, no question. A lot of the same kind of action that we saw last night. And so I would recommend people go back and listen to that if they want to, a kind of a synopsis of some of the other unification fights in the junior middleweight division. But we were expecting another good fight last night on Showtime, and it delivered. It definitely 100% delivered. At least through 6 or 7 rounds, it was an extremely competitive fight and a back and forth fight. And then it wound up just that Jermell Charlo took over. There was nothing Brian Castaño could do at some point. It just seemed as though he was getting broken down, and then he got crumbled in the 10th round, just awfully, man. But it was a great fight, a really great fight. And now we have one single junior middleweight champion.
And that's good for boxing, isn't it? And
it is.
It really is. That eventually the powers that be are going to do their damn best to try to split them up again, because that's what they do. But for the time being,
it never lasts.
It never does. And what is it, 4 or 5 belts? How many belts are we counting now?
Well, and I mean, I guess the
4 belt era still, right?
The point is that Jermell gets the credit for collecting them all, however many they are. But
totally.
But yeah, it's still having to deal with all the sanctioning body nonsense, and still having to.
They're gonna come with it and all that. Yeah. But for the time being, he's able to do something that's extremely hard to do in this day and age, and that's collect all of the championships in the division. I believe he's the first one to be able to do that. Correct?
Yeah, in the quote unquote 4 belt era, nobody can really say exactly when that era started, but whatever, it's cool. Yeah, I guess you could probably say Bernard Hopkins, since he was the first person to collect them all. But regardless, that's not even really that important.
It's just the fact that he became undisputed champion and the undisputed man of that division. Like, he's cleaned it out. You know what I mean? Charlo is Cliff Rold, a fellow historian, said yesterday that Charlo might be the best junior middleweight since Trinidad, which I totally agree with. Or even so, Gerald McClellan, who was an absolute monster at that point in time too. Like, Charlo was just one of the guys. He's come to, he's at the prime of his powers right now. You know what I mean? Last night proved it. It was an extremely, extremely tough fight, as you just mentioned, especially for the first 6-7 rounds. Castaño is an incredibly tough competitor. has solid skills. The pressure that he puts on you, the combinations that he's able to put together when he puts them, when he puts the pressure on you, and he can take a hell of a punch, man. He's just a really, like most Argentinian fighters, are just very rough, tumble fighters. And Castaño is no different, man. He's just a bad mamma jamma. And just like the first fight, it was nip and tuck. Charlo, when he boxed, he was having his moments, but inevitably, he's the type of guy that he loves to get into a shootout. He's not just going to stand there and try to box cautiously. Like, at some point in time, he's going to stand there and want to go toe to toe. He can take a hell of a punch too, as he's proven last night. But like, there was a lot of flurries that Castaño was getting the better of, especially when they got on the ropes. And so you would just like, oh, because at one moment Charlo would be in control, next moment Castaño would be in control. They went back and forth, and there was really no like absolute clear defined winner at that point, because it was so nip and tuck. But that's what we love about this. That's what it was supposed to be when they have the two best guys in the division fighting each other. That it's nip and tuck, and you can't really pull them apart, and that's how and it's just good boxing, clean fighting, good, everything was just well put together, man. These were two of the best fighters in the world on display, and you're just watching them go to work. And like I said before, man, and I think in a previous show, their styles just mesh perfectly. And once again, it just created a perfect storm for like the first 6 rounds.
One of the cool things about the fight was that there was something like for everybody, in my opinion, especially just looking at the action, the entertainment. It was fantastic from that perspective. There was a lot of back and forth, like in the sense that, you couldn't really, like you said, you couldn't really see who was necessarily getting the better of it a lot of the time. But it wasn't just wild action, like with no skill or anything like that. There was a lot kind of like to be looking for. Castaño was applying a lot of pressure, but the way that he applies pressure is just funny, because it's pressure even when he's not throwing punches. He's on your ass, and it's like he's not even throwing punches, and it's scary. And so you could actually even see it in Jermell's face from time to time, that he was kind of like reacting to having to like get the fuck off me, dude. Like, get this guy off me. Can somebody get this guy? And
there was a few times I thought Charlo was wilting, especially when Castaño was starting to get a lot of success on the ropes and like landing some serious combinations.
And that's what I mean, is just like Charlo was actually lashing out and getting the better of a lot of the exchanges, but they didn't seem to be affecting Castaño until about a certain point,
Totally. I think it was an uppercut that Charlo landed. I don't know what round it was, but like it was later on, probably around round 5, round 6. But like that's when I noticed there was a slight turning point, because that was the first time that Castaño really like stood up from that and like stopped for a brief.
Yeah, like rocked him back on his heels for a second. Yeah. Like it almost like made him think like, wait, am I good? Yeah, I'm good. Like,
because Charlo was landing, you saw the replays and the fight, stuff like that. He was landing like the harder punches in the exchanges, like like the finisher. Especially, I think at the end one of the rounds, he lands a left hook that you see totally trade left hooks, and Charlo's is the one that clearly snaps Castaño's head back. But Castaño at that point still looked totally solid. Like he was taking him, kind of smiling. They were just, smiling at each other because they were really bringing the heat. And then, like I said, when that uppercut landed, that's the first time he kind of took a step back and like, was noticeably a little shook. He wasn't really hurt, but like that was the first time that like he took notice of something. And from there, I think that's when the fight started turning ever so slightly. But Charlo, being who he is, when he has the slightest advantage, he's going to turn it up 100 notches. And that's what he did. And a guy like him and his brother, they're very vicious finishers, man. If they have you hurt, they jump on your prey. They're like a pit bull on a pot roast. You know what I mean? They just tear you up. And that's kind of like...
Is that one of those New Bedford sayings?
Nah, I heard that one time. It might have been, actually, it was in New Bedford, so there you go. Yeah.
Some good shit.
But I mean, it's like it's the truth. You know what I mean? It was like he smelled blood, and Castaño finally started breaking down.
Yeah, that was kind of like one of the other things to really be looking for in the fight. Beyond like the action and the kind of like little nuance and stuff like that, is that the fact that both Charlo brothers, but especially Jermell, since we're talking about him last night, they got dog in them, dude. Like if you hit them, they want to get you back. they're not the kind of fighters that will just like sit idly by, dude. They're not going to go quietly. You know what I mean? And I think that was one mistake that Jermell made against Tony Harrison in their first fight, was that he kind of like the passivity, like he didn't throw enough, he didn't do quite enough, he wasn't like, he wasn't aggressive enough and whatnot. And then that's sometimes not his fighting style. He's more of a counterpuncher. And that was kind of another thing to be looking for that I was watching last night, was that it was like a counterpunching battle, because Castaño was like making Charlo lead. And that was what was like, it was just funny to watch, because it was the kind of pressure, like I said, where he's like with his feet positioning himself, Castaño that is, so that Jermell's having to back up, but then he's trying to feint and shit like that to make Jermell punch first so he could counter him. And then Jermell also wanted to counter. So it was like at times this counterpuncher versus counterpuncher battle, which often winds up shitty because it's like a flinch fest and a feint fest. Like think about kind of like a Roy Jones versus James Toney. Much of that fight was just not fun because it's like feint, and it wasn't like that last night. Like they were actually, opening up because they had enough, I guess, not animosity, but they wanted that shit. And like you said, their styles mesh well.
And like you mentioned too, with the type of pressure that they put on and being slight counterpunchers, you can go back in time. A lot of great Argentinian fighters were like that, like Victor Galindez, who sometimes unfairly gets the notion of just being a face for a slugger. He was nothing like that. If you watch his fights, he was the same way. He was crafty in there in the way he positioned himself, the way he would make you leave sometimes, and he could be a counterpuncher or however it may be. Juan Domingo Roldan, another very, very rough guy, but another guy who had a lot of asset.
El Martillo, yeah.
A lot of facets to his skill. And if you watch how he took apart a lot of really good boxers in the 80s.
Yeah, well, his nickname means the Hammer. Yeah. That's because that's what he did, just hammer fools, just hammer away. Bang,
watch this fight with James Kinchin, who was a very, very tough contender in the 80s. And I think that was on the undercard, I want to say, of Leonard Hagler. I wanted something like that. Anyways, Roldan beat the absolute hell out of him, right? But it wasn't just like a slugging thing. Like Roldan was really slick about it. The way he positioned himself and just landing these overhand rights and looping shots and slick and this and that. Like and Kinchin was a good boxer, but he beat the shit out of him, until Eddie Futch mercifully stopped the fight at one point in the middle of the fight. But like, that's what I'm trying to say. To go back to your point, like that type of pressure, there's a lot of like there's a lot of nuanced skill there. And that they have that type of pressure on you is like incredibly troubling for a boxer, man. It's really tough because the guy, like you said, he's not throwing on you, but he's constantly moving in you. He's cutting off the ring, and you're forced to do something about this because you can't just let him suffocate you. Like it's
you're either going to collide or like, something. So that was what Charlo was having to do, was fight him off a lot of the time.
There's no otherwise, what is he going to do? Castaño was going to eat him up.
But then that's the fight that Castaño wants, because that inevitably led to exchanges, which is where Castaño was catching Charlo in the first fight. But I think that one of the big differences was that, at least from what I could see, Jermell looked like he was more cognizant, more aware in the exchanges than in the first fight. And so he was able to kind of avoid a lot of the incoming, and, he was first and last in a lot of those exchanges and just landing more clean. I mean, they were good. And like I said, I think that fight, or that, where that fight is happening, benefits Castaño more often than not. But Charlo was finding ways to kind of break him down in those exchanges. And then between those exchanges, using his jab and, like jab and right hand to the body and stuff like that to just kind of chop away. And so those kinds of punches, they're like not as flashy. They're not as thudding. And then Castaño comes in and he's swinging like a fucking wrecking machine. And it's like, oh my God, you want to score that shit for him, even when it doesn't land. But it's like, I think that if you're slowing those exchanges down, and I'm not the kind of person that's going to go back and do that, because no, but if you were to, I think that you'd see that Charlo is just landing cleaner and not getting hit nearly as much as it initially looks like, in my opinion.
Agreed. They were just,
not that it wasn't great. Like, it was great action.
But both guys, like when you know, like I think Charlo's punches were just much more noticeable in terms of just because Charlo's technique, you know what I mean? His technique, the way he throws it, and the power that he emits from his punches. Dude's a monster. And some of those punches, man, like most guys, Castaño is a tough guy because a lot of those shots that Charlo was landing earlier on, like the left hook that we talked about earlier, or the uppercut, or a few other punches that they landed well thrown combinations would have absolutely flatlined most of the guys in the division. Total. Like he's that type of puncher. Like he has concussive one punch knockout power, you know, one punch changing power. And both him and his brother, you know what I mean? It took a little bit of time to develop that because they were both boxers early on in their career, but now they're just wrecking machines, which I love. And but when they were landing at Castaño was doing really good work. You know, he was landing a lot he was landing both head and body doing well. And like he was some of his flurries, he was at work in Charlo a little bit, but like the cleaner ones, just the much more effective ones, the ones that are much more eye-catching were coming from Charlo at the end of those exchanges. He was always finishing them with an eye-catching punch. That would be the key. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They'd be on the ropes. Castaño would do some work. Charlo would do some work, but then that last punch, Charlo pop would hit him, and you see Castaño's head snap back.
Yeah, I don't want to characterize it like Castaño wasn't landing because he was. There were a handful, that were like, oh shit, like this is getting out of hand. You know, this is going. Yeah, there was a couple rounds where it was like, this might be going a place where Charlo doesn't want, you know? And I remember, I think it was the fourth round. That was a particularly good round where I was like, hot damn, you know, this shit's heating up. And I don't know if Charlo wants that kind of fight, you know? But he managed to kind of tame it through, we had both said, about maybe 6 or 7 or so. Castaño looked game as shit. He looked tough. And then it started looking like his activity rate dropped off. He wasn't taking the punches nearly as good. He was just kind of not absorbing them all that well and slowing down visibly. And Charlo was just kind of like the attacks that he was able to pull off were far more basic. Like he was able to just 1-2 his way in and shit like that, rather than having to, you know, exchange or find a way in exchange or something like that. And to the point where that final punch, or the second to last punch, I guess you could say, that caused the first knockdown, that left hook in the exchange or in close, didn't even land all that clean. It glanced off of Castaño's glove. And I made the reference to Julian Jackson, Buster Drayton, where he just goes boop and, you know, hooks him right through the fucking guard, and he's just standing upright for like 3 seconds and then just falls down.
What a knockout that was, bro.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. It wasn't like Castaño was out cold, but it just reminded me of that. And anyway.
What Jackson would do with his hand like that.
Yeah, dude. Yep.
And Drayton was always like, I don't know if he was grinning or if he was breathing through his mouth because he had the kind of like Dwight Cowee going on where they had the mouthpiece always showing. So it looked like they're grinning at you, which would absolutely suck, because why would you want to fight a guy that you're fighting? He's grinning at you the whole time. But
yeah, no shit.
Anyways, he's, you know, tough guy from Philadelphia, so he can take some shots, and he was taking them. Jackson's there, bop, 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 and then he just, like you said, boosh. And as he does that, iconically.
Yep. Yeah, and then they're on the replay, and Gil Clancy or whoever it is, I can't remember offhand, is just like, oh, look at the arm, look at his hand, because he's going down, he's fucking falling. Yeah, that's great. And he actually did that like 3 or 4 different times too. It's just tough to see on some of the other ones.
Jackson was awesome, man. God bless Julian Jackson. I wish he was around today to fight.
Man,
like I wish he was in the era. Imagine him against Charlo.
Well, just imagine him around it all. Like, I mean, you know, people would just be like, holy shit, he's sleeping motherfuckers left and right. Holy shit.
Center every week, dude. Like, I mean, everyone who listens to the show obviously is a Julian Jackson admirer and whatever.
I would hope so at this point.
Whoever has never seen him, I mean, you know, for like newer fans out there that have never watched him, I mean, my God, he was just an absolute monster. Just not just junior middleweight, like he's arguably one of the hardest, like one of the top 10 hardest punchers in boxing history. Like the guy was just, you know, when you have that type of incredible fist, man, that you can just like tap somebody and they just completely, you know, go into another realm. It's yeah.
Well, it's like I've said on several different shows, probably, you know, whatever shows we're talking about punching power, you know, and we'll get back to the Charlo Castaño business. I swear, we just go on these little excursions every so often. But when it comes to punching power, dude, even when you get a fighter who's like undefeated and they're like 30-0 with 29 knockouts, but you point out, well, they haven't fought anybody. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that. However, knocking out 29 chumps is still hard as fuck. Out of 30, like having a high KO percentage, even over a bunch of bums, is not easy and still usually suggests somebody's got some punching power. So be careful. But regardless, that first knockdown in Charlo Castaño reminded me of that just because he hit him through the glove. But then after that, Castaño's legs were just gone. And I get wanting to let it go on after that, because he did get up, but I don't even remember who the fuck the ref was, but he's like, come, walk to me. And he definitely did not walk to him whatsoever. He was just kind of swaying, and he just wiped his gloves and let it go. Sure enough, he took like a glancing shot and was just all over the place. He was done. His legs were gone at that point. And when they got him up after the end of the fight, like they're trying to like walk him to the corner and he's just like, I don't even know where I am. So he got broken down in those last few rounds. And for whatever reason, as I was kind of watching the live commentary, a lot of people still felt like he was very much in it. And I was kind of watching it like, seems like he's fading away to me. Like, don't get me wrong. He's still dangerous, but he seemed very much like he was getting broken down. And clearly the end result wound up bearing that out. So in any case, we have a junior middleweight champion, a single junior middleweight champion. And I guess the question is, as far as, the future and whatnot, is he just going to be moving up? Is he going to be staying in junior middleweight? What would you prefer him to do? What would you like to see him do?
Be honest, I don't think if he's able to do it, I'd like to see him stay at junior middleweight.
Why does nobody do that shit, dude?
I mean, no one wants. It's because that's not the mentality anymore. It's not to allude to this type of thing, but like there's not many people like Hagler or a few others in the past that just kind of like want to stay in their division and be the king of it. But I think with the welterweights eventually going to be moving up. I know Errol Spence and him are friends, whatever, but that's such a big money fight. It could happen. Or Terrence Crawford or wherever he may end up. Like there's fights that can, if he's the champion right there, he's undisputed champion.
And he just hit 152. I'm not saying hitting that every time's easy. Like I fucking haven't seen 152 since I was like 12 years old. Shit, bro.
I mean, for my preference, I'd like to say, I'd like to see him stay at 154. At 160, his brother is there. Not to say that they've already shared a division before, but like him being at 160 and there's other stuff going on over there. He's the undisputed champion at 154. He's the man right there. Trying to move up and trying to conquer another division. What's the point when you're already the man at this one now? And that there's going to be a lot of guys, a lot of top guys, some of the best fighters in the world, pound for pound, are going to inevitably be moving up to challenge you. So I would say keep that, because at that point you can be the Hagler of your division. At that point, with the fat out of the the four kings, the other ones had to move up to challenge Hagler. Eventually, this is going to happen. The same thing's going to happen to Charlo.
I mean, I guess in a situation where, like, look, we just had I should say Bivol Canelo last weekend. And if Canelo really is going to rematch Dimitri Bivol, then that leaves Gennady Golovkin without a dance partner. And I definitely would not mind.
Are you kidding me? I would kill to see Charlo.
I ain't kicking that fight out of bed for eating crackers if that's what it's coming to. You know what I'm saying? Totally. So that's a damn good fight, and I would love that fight. But like you, just in general, I know that it's like a long road. It took him a while to become undisputed, and also on top of that, like just kind of going back to Jermell for a moment. I'm not going to name any names because that's no point in that shit. But in the post-fight press conference, he started getting kind of heated because, what he felt was a perceived slight from a member of the media who I guess was refusing to put him on a pound for pound list or something. I mean, I don't really pay that close attention to the pound for pound shit, so I couldn't tell you exactly. All I know is that it seemed as though he was pissed, that he felt as though he wasn't getting the respect that he deserved. Overall, I mean, I can't necessarily disagree with him. Overall, the Charlos have been hammering away just as they have, they've just been hammering away the last handful of years. And I think that they just happen to be in divisions where it's like difficult to, it's been difficult to go to the top, especially with Canelo right around there being such a gravitational force for all of the other fighters and preferring to, Canelo fight or trying to get into that Canelo sweepstakes and et cetera, et cetera. So, I would like to see Jermell Charlo defend the 154-pound title a handful of times even, and just make sure that division is fucking like, there's no questions. Nobody's got any claim. Nobody's got any sort of fucking whatever, like that shit is done. But I also,
preference. But I mean, if he wants to move up, let him,
Yeah, I wouldn't begrudge him. It's not as if he decided not to stay at 154 pounds, I'd be like, oh, well, I guess the undisputed title ain't shit anymore. No, like he still obviously became undisputed and collected that shit and took his time to do that shit. And I mean, I don't blame him for, I guess, quote unquote, chasing the money or going after bigger fights, because that's what he probably should be doing. But like you said, though, that kind of would not close the door, but make it more difficult for fights against those welterweights who eventually move up. It would make it more difficult for those to happen if he went up, because going up and then back down that's dangerous shit for fighters.
As we've seen in the past and we've talked about in the past, absolutely.
Yeah, dude, it's a dangerous proposition. So I'd like to see that too, personally. But
what did you? All right, here's my question to you. What did you think of the scorecards at the end of the fight? I thought they were a little wide.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of them was like 89-82 or something like that, which was like kind of ridiculous, because at that point, what is that? Only giving Castaño 1 or 2 rounds.
Yeah, so if it's stopped so it's given Castaño like 2 rounds or something like that.
But I'll be completely honest, like during the first couple of rounds or whatever, we were still kind of on hold of what was going on with the Triller show, so I wasn't paying full attention. But once I was able to, around like round 3 or so, like I gave it the whole fight. Like it was a very, very close fight. Even through the first couple of rounds, it probably was the same as what was going on.
They were difficult to score. The first couple rounds were
So I just think 89-82 is just a little too wide.
Yeah, it was definitely back and forth, and through, I think that the most common score that I saw through 7 rounds or so was 4-3 either way.
Oh yeah.
And that, like, through about 8, that was generally, I think, when Charlo was kind of starting to kind of pull ahead on most people's cards. But no, like it seemed as though most people that I saw on Twitter and whatnot, because that's just usually the most up-to-date place, the cards were fairly close through 7 or 8 rounds, and then they started to widen a bit. But even so, yeah, like, whatever that is, 8 rounds to 2 or 7 rounds to 2, that's a little too wide. That's too much. But we see this every week, and not to take it off into la la land here, but we see this shit every week with scorecards all the time. And it sucks to kind of have to fall back onto that, well, the right fighter won type of shit, because it's like we never wind up getting to address these awful judges who turning in these laughable cards. But it's the same thing with officials in general. There are several referees around the US in particular, and a couple in the UK, who we know for sure, because we've seen it several different times, are absolutely awful officials, and they're still officiating big fights anyway. Nobody's doing a goddamn thing about it. Same thing with judges. There are judges that we see and we're like, fuck, dude.
And that's a big thing, man. That needs to be overhauled.
Like Glenn Feldman pops up and people are like, God damn it, dude. Or, somebody, Dave Moretti, and they're just like, fuck, dude. Or something like that. And it's like, but it's all of the time.
And especially like in Nevada, they're old as dirt, and other officials
Nevada
out there,
they're long considered the gold, or one of the gold standards in the US, but has one of the worst possible fucking commissions on the face of the planet. It's so bad. Like, especially compared to what it's thought of, what it's perceived as. It's an absolute joke, dude. So, I mean, again, I don't want to go off into some fucking crazy shit, but it definitely, how many years now we've been talking about, like, somebody taking this over, whether it's the feds or a national commission or whatever. All we know is that what is currently happening is a pretty stupid system where people who suck are allowed to keep working.
It's boxing in a nutshell, my friend.
So who's going to change it? I don't know.
I don't know, man. We discussed the Muhammad Ali Act in the past, and there's always been like rumblings of commissions. The FBI has, obviously been involved in boxing before, trying to nail down Don King and the IBF and other infractions or whatever. But in terms of just overhauling everything, it's probably never going to happen.
Well, and funnily enough, dude, it's like, the whole Daniel Kinahan shit. That's obviously its own topic, and I definitely would advise anybody to go listen to Shadow Boxing, that podcast series that's been put out by the Irish Daily Star, and Kieran Cunningham done a great job. And I don't say that because they quoted me heavily and talked to me about it. They really did do a great job. But as far as this Daniel Kinahan business, what?
To be careful, bro.
Yeah, I know, no shit. Hopefully I'm all right. But even
that though, I think hiding anywhere, man. They can have goons everywhere.
Why do you think I'm in Vancouver, Washington? I'm witness protect now. No, dude. Like, it's the crazy thing about even just this happened fucking recently. This isn't like 1940s or 50s, but this happened recently. And some of the shit that was Daniel Kinahan and his associates were involved in was basically, it was based around boxing. And that's not even what the feds fucking wanted him for. This is like some Al Capone shit, bro, where he gets popped for fucking taxes.
Boxing is nothing for what they're doing. That's just like a little side activity.
Yeah, where he gets popped for fucking taxes. Like Capone gets gotten for taxes and not some fucking, loans or fucking whatever. So my point is that that's how little anybody gives a shit about this awful nature of this sport that we love. And we do love it. That's not, what's love got to do with it, Tina? But my point is that it's fucking, it's bad, dude. So I don't know that and I know we took it kind of off course there, but these things are connected. The empathy, or I'm sorry, apathy, the lack of fucking concern for these kinds of situations, and the corruption and ineptitude in boxing is totally, it's fucking nil, dude. So I don't know if anybody's gonna do anything about it.
I'm gonna need you after this show, since you just referenced that song. What's love got to do with it? The music video. All right. There's at one point Tina Turner's walking down the street, and there's a guy that looks exactly like Samuel Jackson wearing this yellow cheetah leopard print type shirt. Totally 80s, and it looks just like him, and he has the whole hair and everything. I need to tell me if you think that's him or not, because I'm almost positive it is. And there's been like a whole discussion on the internet if it is or if it's him or not. We can cameo in that.
Yeah, dude, I guarantee you this shit has been covered on Reddit. You need to go find some subreddit, and there will be an entire nuanced fucking scientific breakdown, frame by frame. Yeah. They're going to be like, all right, now Samuel L. Jackson was born in 1961. So you go back, they're going to fucking break this shit down, bro.
If not, it looks just like him. That's all I'll say. But it was pretty hilarious.
That's good shit. But it's possible. Who knows, man?
Considering how good that main event was, we should touch also on the undercard, because a guy of the future, who's a future, looks like everybody's proclaiming him, and I'm kind of going along with it, that he might be the top of the pound for pound list in a few years. We're talking about Boots Ennis.
Boots Ennis has, ever since he kind of popped up on anybody's radar, and it's been a handful of years now, he's been, I would say, all right, I remember a handful of years ago, longer than a handful now. Mm-hmm. I remember Floyd Mayweather talking about Errol Spence to reporters. Errol Spence
starred Mayweather back in the day, right? And kind of like gave him a good session.
I remember Floyd Mayweather talking about Errol Spence to some reporters. I couldn't even tell you the year. I just know that it was long before he popped up as like on the pro radar. I just remember hearing about it and kind of being like, well, I've never heard of that guy and I've never seen him. So, I mean, cool, but I don't know what that means. And sure enough, like 2 years later, it was like, he was like prospect of the year or some shit like that. And I was like, oh, okay. And so almost fucking identical situation here, dude. I didn't really know. And again, I don't really follow amateur boxing because it's an absolute mess and shit show on the national level here in the US. And it's not easy to follow, like
unless the guy's getting a lot of publicity all over the place that you kind of like, it's easier because he is singularly like that.
Yeah.
Trying to follow it as a whole, it's very, very difficult.
You'd be better off if they're going to international competition like in Europe, then you could follow it. In the US, like on the national level, it's awful. So it's difficult.
They don't televise it the way back in the day. So
no. And yeah, and papers don't cover it either. Like even local papers don't cover it the way that they used to. So it's difficult to follow. And so that's why I didn't hear about either Spence or Ennis until a couple of years ago. Same kind of similar situation. You hear about this guy, Jaron Ennis. No, never heard about him. And then, of course, started remembering his nickname Boots. And a couple of years ago, he starts popping up on the Pro Radar. And I'm like, oh, okay, I remember that. I remember hearing that name. And you start fucking hearing why. And obviously, gym fighters and gym rumors and shit like that. We talked about this a handful of history episodes ago, like the gym legends and shit like that. Oftentimes, they don't fucking wind up bearing out. But there are fighters who look absolutely fantastic in the gym, give fools the business in sparring, and seem like they're can't miss blue chip prospects and guaranteed to be champions or something like that. And I don't want to go too far because he's still got stuff to prove, but he looks fucking gangbusters, bro. He looks great.
Oh man, he's the total package right now. Like I think he's obviously ready for a world title. I mean, I think he's mandatory for Spence, right?
I think I'm pretty sure, yes. And it's like one of those situations where it's like you almost feel bad.
I don't see that fight happening anytime soon either, which sucks because even though he's mandatory, just because of the politics of the sport, I'd be shocked if that fight happened anytime soon.
And that's what I mean is like you almost feel bad for him because here he is at like 28, 29 fights in, and he's clearly at a level where he's ready for a world title or that, level fighter. But you have to be really careful about where you go with him, especially because there's all these other name fighters just fucking littering the landscape at, 140 to 154 pounds that he could potentially face. And it's tough, dude. There's a lot of stiff competition. It like surges upward really quickly, steep learning curve. Not that anybody, I don't think, really doubts that much, but there's a lot of different directions for him to go in, and the politics kind of make it funky for sure.
And it sucks, man, because not like this could have been a fight where if you like in the 90s, I'll give you an example, like Obakar, who was completely undefeated. Probably if he was in this era today with the Twitter, in the Twitter era, in the way boxing Twitter is, would be heavily hyped and deservedly so. And when he challenged Felix Trinidad, like that was a fight. Carr was just, the contender at that point, like undefeated top contender. Trinidad was the IBF champion. They ended up having a fight. Obviously, the sport has completely changed since then, but like that, you wish that could be something similar to that, where Ennis can just finally just get his title shot. He's mandatory challenger. He deserves it. He just make the fight. But like, because the way politics are and everything, they're gonna want to try to marinate something like this. Well, I mean, I get it, but like, it's just
if you're like, just think about it from their perspective, right? Like, and anybody, I guess, listening in and going like, fuck that, they should be matching people left and right.
I get it. It's just,
and like, I don't disagree as a fan. I want to see those fights. You do, fans do, but just think about it from Premier Boxing Champions perspective. If you have a fighter like Jaron Ennis, who's looks like a beast, clearly can punch, extremely skilled, moves well, pretty much the entire package. And it
is well represented, like speaks well for himself, everything. Yeah. He's a good dude in general. Just seems to be can't miss.
And so the question kind of becomes, who do you sacrifice?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just put it bluntly, who do you sacrifice to this kid?
Since I don't think he's going to fight for a title next, I would love to see him fight Thurman or Danny Garcia.
And that's the answer, dude, is that you're unfortunately going to have to go to the fucking well.
Yes.
To
for your yeah, exactly. Go back and see your chest.
But I mean,
but those will be good fights.
And I mean, unfortunately, from the PBC perspective, because somebody's going to have to lose, whether it's Jaron Ennis, because if he can't beat a Danny Garcia, then what business does he have moving forward to an Errol Spence?
Totally.
Or if he can't beat a Keith Thurman, then why should they put him in with Errol Spence? But if he can beat a Keith Thurman or a Danny Garcia, then
impressively.
And whoever which one gets beaten, their comeback just got fucking smashed right in the nuts. So, you know, that's what I'm saying is somebody's getting sacrificed. So what do you do?
You know what sucks too is that guys like that already have a track record of not taking fights to show themselves to be a stepping stone. Like Thurman is not.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, is
Thurman
that
probably wouldn't accept that fight because he knows
he'll know what time it is. Yeah,
exactly, and he already knows that he'd be used as a
time,
and he doesn't consider himself someone like that. Same thing with Danny
and rightly so. You know, like those guys have earned. They have earned one. You know, whether you feel they have or not. You know, they have earned.
Totally, they don't feel that like at this point in time, Boots Ennis is still high risk, low. You know, like too much of a high risk to get like the reward they're looking for it. Like they're looking for a big like Errol Spence payday or a big fight like that. They're not looking to fight the top contender who's going to tear their head off. So yeah, man,
and they got passed up for that Floyd or Manny money. Like, and I mean, it is what it is, you know, like, because it just wasn't there for most of them. But, you know, so then I think that's kind of just what happens though, is that you're going to wind up having to take still really good money, but not that massive money fight. And
do you think Spence vacates a belt?
What's that?
Do you think Spence vacates, gets stripped of a belt or vacates or something stupid happens? So what is he? Is he like IBF mandatory?
I'd have to look. I have no idea. Well, here.
That's what it was. It was for the IBF.
I have his shit pulled up. And so if it's a minor, oh no, it doesn't even say. So
it was I think it was an eliminated for the IBF.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. Well, whichever one it is, I would imagine that whoever it is, whether it's Crawford or Spence, well, no, it's got to be Spence. So whatever belt that is, he would probably drop it, because even though he's kind of playing semi-coy last night when they asked Errol Spence about Crawford, like he wasn't like, oh yeah, fuck yeah, let's fight that fool. He's like, yeah, that's fine, let's get that. You know, but that's also just kind of Errol Spence. That's just his kind of.
He's just country in a good way.
He's just country and laid back, dude. Yeah. He's gonna go mess with his horses and shit in a little bit. But like, yeah. But I mean, even so, it sounds like that's the fight he wants. It sounds like Crawford wants that fight. It sounds like at this point, with everybody involved saying they want the fight, if it doesn't happen, it would be the dumbest fucking indictment of like everything going on in boxing. So I truly hope that that's the case and they make that fight happen. So if that is the case, Spence would drop the belt to make that fight happen, just because it's a much bigger fight.
And I can see, you know, Boots become an IBF champion fighting whoever is the number 2 and number 3 contender, because the IBF has a trick. All right, look, as you know, and everybody else knows, the IBF, as much as they follow the rules, as opposed to the other ones, and people mention that, they have an incredibly bad track record of shitty mandatory challenges, who they will strip you for whatever reason. All right, like, and you see like who they're supposed to fight, and then you see who the IBF mandatory challenger is, and you're like, wait a minute, is Bob Lee still like in charge of it? Something like, you know.
Oh, dude. Yeah, and I mean, again, thinking about it business wise from the PBC perspective, perhaps that's what's best. Perhaps it's best for the IBF or whomever to strip Errol Spence, and then Jaron Ennis gets to fight somebody else. Definitely,
and that wouldn't even matter to Spence, because at this point, Spence is one of those guys that's above the belts. Everybody knows he's consensus won the bet. Not even,
especially if he beats Crawford or just faces Crawford, because whoever wins that fight, who gives a fuck if they have that belt? That's just the best welterweight and probably the best fighter in the world.
Him, Crawford, Canelo, guys like that are just like above the belts now, and like, you know, when they fight. Beating, so yeah. So
for PBC, that would honestly probably be a best case scenario, because then they don't have to sacrifice one of those fighters to Jaron Ennis, or at least not one of those fighters like Spence, you know, specifically, but they can continue to develop Jaron Ennis kind of on the side as a champion.
Well, also too, one of those guys that we just mentioned, like Garcia or Thurman or even Broner, for example, who I guess is back in training. they might be more enticed if Ennis has a belt as opposed to
exactly. And so he can still get good money facing some of these names that aren't one of the people they don't want to sacrifice.
Totally.
So yeah, it makes sense. And that might even be a best case scenario for him and them. But it seems as though there's, I don't want to say frustration. That's not the right word, but it does seem to be that people are wanting to see like what level he's at. Like they want a stiffer test, because a lot of people felt, myself included, that Custio Clayton would be like,
yeah, totally.
He'd give him some rounds, and he did not. So now it's kind of like, all right, well,
when he got dropped, you see the way he looked and smiling and everything, like he knew he was overwhelmed. And
and you can't take that punch like to the ear, like leaning down where you don't even see it come. You can't take that punch from a puncher. Like that shit'll bust your equilibrium.
And if you watch some of those ear punches, like in history or whatever, like trust me, they look glancing. Some of them you're gonna be like, what the hell was that? Have someone get knocked down?
Yeah, it looks like nothing.
Yeah, it looks like nothing. Ask Sugar Ray Leonard when he got hit in the ear by Tommy Hearns in their second fight, and he got dropped.
Especially if it's one of those shots where like you see it in the replay and their head like hits their shoulder, and you're like, nah, dude, like you're not meant to do that. Your body's not meant to contort that way. But
well, here's the equilibrium. Totally, your legs go spaghetti leg. You're there, and you're just like, wait a minute, what the hell's going on with me? Boom.
So, I mean, we've in the last like maybe half dozen fights or so with Jaron Ennis seen him, and again, not frustration. It's just people want to know, like, where's he at then? In the last maybe half dozen fights, we've seen him against the kind of top 20-ish level, steadily climbing upward to like the top 12, top 10-ish level, and he's dispatching everybody. So clearly the name of the game is we need to see how much farther he can go, but it sure seems like he can go pretty far.
A lot of people are proclaiming him to be one of the future of the fight game, and with the way he's displaying his skills right now, man, he's totally living up to that at this point. Like you said, I want to see him tested against the absolute elite. I think he's ready for that. He feels he's ready for that.
Yeah.
So if these
until we see different,
we see different. Yeah, there's nothing you can say, man. He's showing the goods right now. It's not to say that this hasn't happened in the past. There's guys that looked like can't miss before that somehow, fell apart for one reason or another. You had Panchito Bajado in the early 2000s, who not so much for what happened inside the ring, but for all of his, outside the ring activities.
Oh yeah. Well, everything. I mean, that was just that was a wild ride, man. My boy, my boy Steve Forbes.
Ennis is like 10 times much more advanced than what Bajado ever became of his career. But just to give you an example of guys that were proclaimed as the future of the fight, of the sport. So go back to the
or another guy from the same class, Ricardo Williams Jr.
Totally. That's actually a better example, because Ricardo Williams Jr. was like touted by everybody.
The first $1 million signing bonus.
Yeah, with Lou DiBella, totally. Yep. And if you saw him in the amateurs, you would have thought he was going to be a future pound for pound great. I mean, he had all the skills going on, everything like that. But as a pro, it just didn't really pan out early on. And then what was it? He lost against Juan Valenzuela.
Yep. Was it Pollo Valenzuela, right?
On HBO, yeah.
Yep.
And even before that, he just looked like, I remember watching him.
They talked about it, like, because fools had written about it, that they were like, yeah, he looked real, like he just wasn't even interested. He was kind of had this look on his face, like he's just fighting his way through. His
career, man. Like he was never he was never really in shape, even though like he would make weight, but he never was
super bland in interviews.
Yeah, very bland and everything. He just wasn't really caring. And then I remember watching him against Tehran Millette, who was used as like the sacrificial lamb for his World Boxing, HBO World Boxing champion.
Yeah, dude, like Zab Judah, like, yeah, just everybody was busting him up.
Yeah. And when he fought him, like, he was really bland in that fight. Like, that was a big fight for him. And, like, on a big stage, and he just kind of went through the motions of it. He won the fight, but you're just kind of like, man. And then, soon enough, everything fell apart for him. And then if you want to go back to the 90s really quick, another guy that was proclaimed as maybe a future of boxing and a can't miss guy after he became champion was Eddie Hobson. Remember him?
Yeah, oh, I know the name, but I don't remember it from the time. Yeah.
I mean, no, I wasn't like, that was like the very early stages of my fandom of boxing. So like I kind of read about him in Ring Magazine, and then I read that he was going to fight Tracy Harris Patterson. for in his first defense of his title, which was aired on, I think, ABC, and was supposed to be like his coming out party in terms of like uh mainstream publicity. And instead, Patterson kind of rocked his world and destroyed him in 2 rounds in a massacre. And Hobson, I mean, it was bad, man. Hobson that got absolutely demolished.
Oh,
And
man.
it's too bad too, because Hobson was a guy that used to, like, I guess he was obsessed with DC Comics because he used to wear like a Batman stuff and all that, and he used to make Lou Duva wear a Joker T-shirt. And if you look and you see big old Lou Duva,
Yeah.
it's this really tight Joker, like Joker T-shirt with the two double guns up in the '80s. It's pretty hysterical. But
Damn, he's just came a couple years too early, dude, because that shit would have been, hot now.
totally. But just to give you some examples, do I think Boots is going to be like any of those guys from the past? No, totally. I think he's the real deal, and he's totally, he's going to become a world champion and become one of the elite fighters in the future. But I'm just ready for him to, and he's ready as well for for him to do that. So I just want to
Yeah.
see him be tested. Is the Spence fight coming next? Absolutely not, man. That's a fight that's going to be marinated and whatever's going to happen. But I'd love to see him fight one of the other PBC elites that they have going on.
Yeah, it would be nice to see him. I mean, I don't want to say like fast tracked, but it would be nice to see him kind of in there a lot sooner. But
Yeah.
dude,
I like to see also too. I like, what I liked yesterday about his performance was like he was much more, I would say, like a little bit more relaxed and measured than as I've seen him in the past. Like usually he's been a front runner. Like, he goes out there, he has really blazing fast hands and great combinations and good power and just knows how to put everything together. So he's kind of overwhelmed guys. But for the 2 rounds of this fight, he seemed much more measured in terms of his approach.
yeah, he seems
And
smooth and
totally.
fucking chill for sure.
And if he does that, if he's gonna be like that in the future, man, he's gonna be a major problem for everybody.
Yeah, a killer, dude, for sure. Well, another I don't think they were expecting this level of test, dude, but I did want to mention I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Triller card anyway, but on that card.
I mean, that was, bro, for as much of as a fiasco as it was entertaining. It was at least all right, the beginning of it was. So go on.
Yeah, no, there was some entertainment to be had for sure, but one of the fights on there that was unexpected in terms of the result was Evander Holyfield's son, man. Evan Holyfield
Oh
got
man,
sparked. Ouch. Owie.
absolutely, bro.
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, look, there's
We
not really.
talked about fighters, kids before, and and who's who's been famous, who's tried to make it big, whatever it has to be. Like Holyfield's kids, eventually one of them was going to try to do it. You know what I mean? There was a little bit of hype around Evan, and he's blown through his early competition, but there's a lot of holes in his.
It's just the way that you worded that, dude. Because I'm like, he's got so many kids, so eventually one's gonna try to get him.
I mean, it's the truth, though, right? Like, you know, but a person, like, when a fighter or whatever sports person has, like, more than a few kids, like, eventually
No,
one.
it's true. It is true. Yeah.
Yeah,
Especially the boxing bug, dude. That shit bites hard.
absolutely, man. And like Holyfield's kid, and like Evan said, seeing Evander getting inducted into the Hall of Fame and going back and watching his career, who wouldn't be inspired seeing your dad whoop up on Mike Tyson or fight Riddick Bowe or all these other fighters and seeing the accolades that his dad like came up. Of course, I'm gonna. If I was the son of a former champion, I would totally follow and try to follow in his footsteps. Probably get my ass knocked out, but I would still try to do it. And
Whew. Yeah, he got popped pretty good last night, man.
but that's the problem with these kids, though, man, is that, like, unfortunately, there's an exception. Like Vargas's kids, for example, look like they're being brought up the right way. Like they came up through an amateur program and like they got that proper skills and they were like built before they were being pushed out to the masses. Chavez's kid, for example, Chavez Jr., even though he turned pro without much of without anything of it resembling an amateur career, he was matched against absolute nobodies for a long, long time until he developed to whatever he became.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Other former kids champions, kind of the same thing. Evan Holyfield, for example, I mean, even though he was fighting nobodies, he's always kind of still been in like the spotlight to a degree already, and like kind of held to a
Yeah.
certain side because he's promoted by main events. His first pro fight was, I think, on a pay-per-view or something like that, whatever it was. And the name attached to him, and like, all the attention that's been brought to him and all that. And I mean, he's had a few off fights. I know he fought on a Boston boxing card hosted by our buddy Gray Johnson,
Yep.
and he's had a few other things. But like, for the most part, his name, he's always been kind of like more in the spotlight, more so than just trying to be developed, like more like club show scenes or whatever. But for the most part, he's been held to a little bit more of like, in the spotlight standard as opposed to others because of his name. And he's been featured more, even though he's probably not ready
Yeah,
to be.
the name's big on posters and shit like that.
Yeah. And he's not ready for that. That's almost like how some, like, to give you a wrestling reference, sometimes wrestlers' kids or just certain wrestlers are pushed on television before they're ready. Sometimes they're not ready for that. And then they show, then they're exposed and they just kind of look like ass. And you're just kind of like, wait, what the hell's going on here? And they can never really recover from that. Holyfield was already being fast tracked a little bit. The fact that he was being featured on this Triller card with Vargas' kid, and there was a whole like all families thing being involved with it, kind of added to it. But no one expected him to get whooped, And the thing about journeyman, I love journeyman. You love journeyman. The boxing journeyman, like good journeymen, are guys that like hold down day jobs, don't have the greatest record, but they can give you good ass fights. You know what I mean? Especially if they have like a chance that they have more than like a week's notice to get prepared for something like this. And Evan Holyfield's opponent was one of those type of guys. He's an electrician by day. Never really had a lot of good opportunities, but he's always like, been in the gym, stayed consistent, just waiting for a chance. And he had the opportunity of a lifetime here, and he took total advantage of it. Holyfield's kid, like, he's not a bad fighter per se, but he's just not ready to be like, exposed to this type of to the masses like this yet. You know what I mean? He should still be developed. Hell, like he should still be like in the early development stages, kind of like Wilder when he was on like off TV, way out in the boondocks somewhere, just knocking over stumble bums. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
well, and it's in a lot of ways, it's not fair to him. It's not fair to them, but it is just kind of the way that boxing works. And then when you get an opponent, a journeyman or whatever, that's uncooperative, that they might know what they're there for, but they're not going by the script, as they say. They're
and especially if it's just the opportunity of a lifetime, like the guy last night, man. I can't recall it off the top of my head. I'm not looking at it, so I don't know.
Jermaine McDonald.
Jermaine McDonald.
Yeah.
Like, you can tell, especially after the fight, I was so happy for him because you can tell he's never had this type of publicity before. He was totally nervous during his during the post-fight interview, kind of like awkward or whatever, because he was still kind of like taking it in. You know what I mean? Of what he just did. But it's always
and
great.
It could lead to a big opportunity. I mean,
like, listen, whenever journeymen score an upset, this always gets them more fights, regardless.
Even if it's just as a journeyman again. Yeah,
totally. For example, you remember the name Sam Hill, the guy that knocked out David Reed in Reed's last fight?
Yep, of course.
Of course. Hill got a few well-known fights after that. He fought Jermaine Taylor on HBO. He fought a few other guys after that. Like, he was around. I think he fought Ronald Hearns, for example. Like, journeyman, if you score an upset, inevitably you're going to be brought back on television to fight another prospect, or at least, have another fight that's going to bring you some decent money. And totally. He's definitely going to get this guy, he's going to get more publicity from this. This was a big win for him, and it was a big knockout for him. And this was a huge upset. Like, no one expected this. Holyfield was supposed to just, roll over him and keep on, progressing as way he was. And the fact that he ended up looking kind of like Nate Robinson on Triller, not to say it was the same thing. Like, he got up and pushed Raul Carlos Jr. away and was kind of annoyed or whatever. But, like, he was completely knocked out from that fight. And no, this was a win for a journeyman today. It was awesome.
Yeah, dude, it was probably the highlight of the card, not to, talk badly of Evan Holyfield in any way, but just in terms of being a shock and not, being unexpected.
It's a cool good story too, man. Whenever a journeyman, a guy that's not like with an upended record, ends up scoring a big win, you always feel good for them and happy, because that's not supposed to happen. Like in any sport, when the underdog wins, you get excited for them. You know what I mean?
Well, and not to just start throwing cliches out there and shit too, but for Evan Holyfield, it is an opportunity. It is an opportunity where if he is going to be a fighter, dude, then he's going to have to take a long, hard look at I mean, who's in his corner, what he's been doing, the training. Has he been approaching this the correct way? Does he need to go back off of TV for 2 years and see what's what,
he really needs
etc.
he needs a lot to develop, man. Like,
So
I mean, the way his reflexes were, everything else, he was wide open for that. Threw a jab, dropped his hand, got hit with a right hand.
it was like he didn't see it at all. Like not even one iota. Left his jab out there and just took, like, it wasn't, I'm not gonna talk shit like, oh, I'll take that punch every day, like, but it didn't look like it was a massive punch from a huge puncher. It just caught him clean because he left his jab out there. So I mean, that's what's gonna happen.
I mean, you leave your chin out and you drop your jab and you're lazy with it. Eventually, someone's going to learn how to counter that with a right hand or whatever it may be. And when Holyfield got hit, And here's the thing, too, bro. When you get hit with a right hand and you get face planted, that's very hard. That's one of the hardest knockdowns to come back from, because not only do you get hit and you get dropped, like, and you're kind of like done from that hit. When you face plant, you're hitting the canvas face first. You're knocking the shit out of yourself a second time in a row right after that.
Yeah, dude, those are the kinds of knockdowns where referees often will just like call the fight
without even pulling a count. They just call the fight immediately.
Yeah, face down is like bad news. And anyway, he got popped pretty good, and this is obviously a massive roadblock because he was like 9-0 or something like that. So this is his first loss. Big opportunity for his opponent, but on the card also, like you said, just wanted to mention real quickly, Fernando Vargas's 3 sons, Fernando Jr., Amado Vargas, and Emiliano Vargas, all scored wins. And
Vargas was unhinged yesterday.
Dude, he's
in a good way, man. I know he's proud.
He's a sports dad for sure. He's definitely a sports dad. Fucking good, over there, fucking death metal vocals.
What can I say? It was the royal nutsack. All right, you know what I mean? I built these kids. I can't tell you. I just did it. I built champions.
That's Oxnard, dude. That's top of the food chain.
To his credit, though, man. His kids seem like they're respectful and they seem like they're very excited for what they're doing in their career, as opposed to being like obnoxious assholes or anything. So I'll give them that. You know what I mean? I'll fall and all three of them were exciting last night. Not, they weren't boring fights. Vargas being in the court, cheering their on, and I kind of dig it for the moment. So I'll go along with it.
No, that's true. And I will give them that, dude, because often we do see offspring of fighters and they don't look like shit, with all due respect, but they do look like real fighters. Like you said, they look like they have been brought up. They have been taught a thing or two. They look well schooled. They don't look like crappy or anything like that. And so it will be interesting to see all 3 of them develop, especially since if they're going to be kind of like, doing the family thing. But speaking of
Triller said they signed him for long-term contracts, so I'm sure we're going to be seeing the Vargas clan for a minute. And I'm down with it, man. Like, to see Vargas going wild ringside and to see his kids not, fighting the way, and like they have fun styles, you know what I mean? Like they all 3 getting hit a little bit during the fights, and all, besides the first fight, they all produce kind of knockouts or really exciting fights. Yeah, I'm with it. I can't wait to see how they develop. I'll be cool with it.
They pressure. They should be pretty good TV fighters, so it's all good. Totally. Unfortunately, on the other side, the Pulev brothers, dude.
Oh my God, bro.
They were a little bit difficult to stomach, with all due respect, because you got Kubrat, Pulev, and Jerry Forrest, and that was just
Lovegate. Yeah.
Oh man, it was. Yeah. First of all, I didn't know. I think it was about 2 hours ish, 2 hours or so.
Yes. Yeah. Because I think Gray mentioned it on Twitter that that there was about 2 hours from Vargas's kid scoring a knockout in his pro debut to Kubrat, Pulev, Jerry Forrest. And I remember just sitting there because we were kind of, just on call, on hold, whatever. And so I'm watching Showtime, but I'm also watching on my laptop, just getting ready to watch. And you just see Jerry Forrest sitting there kind of dejected, one hand wrap on, one hand wrap off. And Pulev, and then they cut back to Pulev's corner. It looks as he's kind of arguing with the people saying, I don't want to give him my gloves. And you got to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And no one knows what the hell is going on. And you're just kind of sitting there. And I'm just like, and at this point, I'm saying to myself, you know what? Just call this fight off. Like, if they're going to be like this, what's the point? Like, flip the script, do something, like, enough, because
imagine being Kovalev and like sitting backstage and having to keep yourself warm or whatever the case is for that long. Holy shit.
Well, you know that photo of him like completely laying out to actually for the Canelo fight. It's kind of the same thing. He's like, is this deja vu? He has to go through this shit twice in a row now.
Awful, dude. Fucking awful. And I mean,
that's a fault on the people in charge of this fight. How do you not have a pair of extra large gloves in case of anything? These are heavyweights, all right? They have average size fists. Their hands are bigger than the average size individual. All right. You need something like that to be the fact that you don't have extra large gloves or anything like that to fit a guy like that is that's amateur hour. Everyone's scrambling, and they were begging him. Did you see they were begging Pulev in the corner, please let him use your extra gloves? And he was like, no.
Yeah. So just for anybody who didn't watch or who's confused, basically what happened was that Jerry Forrest, Kubrat Pulev's opponent, showed up, and I guess there was some issue because the commission usually has to approve gloves, right? Like the fighter generally supplies like 2 pairs of gloves, 1 pair and then a backup just in case, because gloves tear, shit happens, whatever. And so then the commission has to approve them, and if it's a big fight, your opponent usually has to approve them too. And there's a whole big thing. Sometimes it's in the contract what gloves could be used, et cetera, et cetera. But something happened, don't specifically know what. Jerry Forrest did not have gloves or didn't have the proper size gloves, and so then they wound up having to haggle with Kubrat Pulev to be able to use his backup gloves for Jerry Forrest. They went back and forth for fucking ever trying to do this shit, and they wound up, it was like 2 hours on the broadcast. They killed time doing God knows what. And like they interviewed everybody, bro. They interviewed like every possible celebrity. Yeah, bro. Oh, look, there's TV's Patrick Duffy. Look at you. Yeah, you want to come over and talk to us? No, okay, no problem. It was like, holy shit, dude, terrible.
They recapped. They showed both of all the Vargas fights.
Yeah, they were showing replays. They're going through slow mos. They're like, they literally
Fernando Vargas about the Love Gate and asked him his opinion. He gave his thoughts on the whole situation.
Dude, it was something. It was something. It sure was something.
You know what? Part of the course of Triller so far, right? A little bit.
Jerry Forrest winds up. He's like twice scored big shots that wound up kind of briefly wobbling Kubrat Pulev. They were like Hail Mary shots, and that was it. Those were his only moments of the fight, and he was otherwise dominated. And it was a pretty bad fight because it's 2 big ass heavyweights just smacking into each other for whatever 10 rounds. But then Sergey Kovalev makes, I think it was his cruiserweight debut. If it wasn't, it was his second fight at cruiserweight. Whatever it was, he fought Kubrat Pulev's brother, who, I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't even know. What's that?
I don't mean to cut you off. They, at one point during the broadcast, they said we're showcasing 3 legendary families in boxing. And I'm assuming they were referencing the Pulev brothers as well. I'm not fucking with you. Like,
does Jerry Forrest got some famous siblings? I mean,
I'm not even lying. They said 3 legendary boxing families. And I know Holyfield and Vargas. Vargas is even legendary. You want to I'm put asterisk to that, but
sure. I'll accept that. But now we're really reaching.
Then Pulev's. Because who else was on that card? Unless somebody deep on the undercard that I'm not familiar with. Maybe Danny Lopez's cousin or something was fighting.
Bro, I'm not going to lie to you. And maybe somebody's going to just mark me as a fucking hashtag casual now. But I didn't even know that Kubrat Pulev had a brother until they announced the motherfucking show. I thought Kovalev was fighting Kubrat Pulev. And I was like, holy shit, this is going to be nuts. And then they're like, oh no, it's the little Pulev. I was like, oh, little Pulev. I want Pulev Jr. But
yeah, man.
But no, look, it was also kind of a tedious fight. Sergey Kovalev played it fairly safe, as he probably should have. He's moving up a division.
But he made sure he did, because he yelled at him every time he started unloading combinations on him. What are you doing? Don't do that. Go back to boxing. Thanks, buddy. Prolong my night.
It was and when Sergey Kovalev uses his jab, we've said this about other fights where we've previewed and recapped in the past, and we talked about it with the Canelo fight. When he uses his jab, he's a very formidable fighter. He's a very skilled fighter, and he used his jab a lot last night, but it did not make for a super exciting fight. And then look, dude, I'm not trying to blame anybody. and it just happens sometimes, but it made for a super tedious fight to watch because it was already getting super late. And then it was like 10 rounds of Kovalev jabbing the shit out of this guy. It's like, fuck, dude, this is rough. Like it would be really nice to get a war to close this out or something. But in any case, it's just what it was. And it was you condense all of that shit and make it like not a 6-hour card. It would be totally fine. It was just it was a lot of time to kill, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, you know what though? As much as Triller has their faults and whatever, I'm not going to blame Triller for Glovegate. That clearly wasn't.
Yeah, that wasn't their fault. Yeah,
that wasn't their fault. That was.
And they did what they could.
Yeah, that was the boxing people's fault. They just happened because they just happened to catch the brunt of that. But the fights weren't. The Vargas family again. They were entertaining. Like the Holyfield's kids being knocked out was a big upset. The Pulev brothers going the distance with Kovalev and Jerry.
Legendary.
The legendary Pulev brothers. Was pretty tedious, but I will say too that the Onyx and Cypress Hill battle was very entertaining.
Dude, Onyx, bro. That's some 90s Twitter, shit.
According to Twitter, no one even knew that battle was going on, but I didn't even know they were going to battle each other. But it was a lot of fun, man. Like, me living in New York, being from the East Coast, I'm always going to be an Onyx person. Anytime I listened to Onyx a lot as a kid growing up, everything like that. Even as an adult, I remember messaging you yesterday saying I'm getting like listening to them gets me angry that I want to go outside and pick a fight. But like, listening to them, Cypress Hill, I wasn't even listening. I wasn't even going on like who's going to win at battle. I was just enjoying myself as an old hip hop head. So
I might still have my back the fuck up cassette tape. I might still have that shit.
I have an original on vinyl.
Yeah, I might still have that shit. But yeah, dude, it's not Triller's.
They all look the same, man. They still look.
Oh, I know, bro. Sticky Fingers is like looks like he looks
amazing.
He looks like he hasn't fucking aged a day, bro. Fucking ridiculous.
I love it. I mean, it's still one of my goals to see Onyx live, and this is the one time only. I would jump in a mosh pit probably if they did that. Like, absolutely, it would be awesome.
Dude, they look like they'd bring fucking fun energy to a live show and shit like that.
Totally.
And on top of that, there's a ton of them, so it's like, yeah, you just fucking watch them fucking do their shit on stage.
They're like Wu-Tang, man. They just got millions of members.
Yep, dude. It's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
Like it's not Triller's fault, dude. In a way, it's almost kind of like
that's why we had to mention that. It's really not Triller's fault.
It's not.
No. It's boxing.
Exactly. It's like them finding out the hard way that this is what happens when you fuck with boxing, dude. Is that like there's shit that's gonna happen that you ain't never thought of, dude. The fucking ring rope comes undone. It breaks. Part of the ring goes under. Some shit, breaks a leg. There's literally anything that can fucking happen will happen. But
at your own risk for getting involved in this crazy ass sport
that's what happens, bro. I will say, I think that they have a cool concept, weaving the fucking music into the fights and shit like that. So I don't know. It's all good. It wasn't their fault. It was just wound up being a super fucking tedious card. However,
I just hope they promote it better next time, because like a lot of people on Twitter seemed like they were interested in the Onyx Cypress Hill battle, but no one seemed to know that it was even on,
Well, and on top of that, to be honest, dude, the fighters on the card didn't really match Cypress Hill and Onyx, like that demographic. Like nobody who would be into a Cypress Hill and Onyx battle for the most part is going to be super into almost anybody on that card. So I mean, that's part of it too. But like I said, that's not even really the point. It just wound up being rough.
You know what? To their credit, and Sean Porter and the rest of the announcers acknowledge this, a lot of the fans actually stayed even during all that crazy shit that was going on. Like, and they were just sitting there idly for almost 2 hours, and people were booing and getting really annoyed, and they were reaching a certain point. But for the majority of the time, they actually did stay for that.
Yeah,
the fact that they stood for those 2 fights when they weren't that exciting.
It's dedicated boxing fans, people are hardcore, bro.
And better than I could be, man, because at that point, I don't know how, my patience at that point would have been wearing extremely thin.
Well, Well, we ain't gonna dwell on the Triller card and the craziness, dude. Earlier in the night was really where it was at. You know, having a unified and undisputed junior middleweight champion was
And that's where it
really
is, man.
great stuff,
Boxing
bro.
is really doing good. We have more fights next week and going on, and like we have a solid schedule going on. So anyone that says, as your show says, boxing is dead, go suck an egg. All right.
That's right, baby. It is. It's dead, but it's undead because it keeps coming back, even though people are like, it's dead, and it never stops rising from the fucking grave, bro.
And neither do we, man. We got a lot of good shit on the horizon coming up.
That's
so.
right. This week, I don't know. We're gonna have to talk about it and figure out because I don't know if we know what we're doing this week, but we'll do something probably. We'll at least talk about the shit coming up or try to do true crime, something. We'll do something. We'll figure.
Well, we have discussed a guy from the early '90s that we're going
That's
to
true.
profiling pretty soon. So
That's true. So we'll figure something out. We'll get together this week and have another show. But in the meanwhile, I appreciate you hopping on real quick the morning after, even though you had a long night of work. It's good shit, bro.
absolutely, man. It's always a blast talking about it, especially when we had a lot of significant fights happening last night. So
Man, it just the hits keep coming and they ain't stopping, which I love. I do love.
what's that UFC gift?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fucking all drunk and shit. Yeah. Speaking of a bunch of drunks, bro, I appreciate everybody who tunes in weekly and everybody who's, continues to kind of find and discover the show. Because I mentioned to you yesterday, just kind of peeking at the YouTube analytics, which I do like every so often, just to kind of get an idea of if we're doing something right, if we're doing something wrong, people like it, don't like it. Almost half of our listens and subscriptions on YouTube have come in the last month. So obviously we're doing something right, and we appreciate everybody who's listening and watching it. It's, we really do appreciate that. If you did listen in, for instance, on the podcast, go to whatever podcast apps you're using, Apple Podcasts, Google, whatever it might be, subscribe, leave us a comment, leave us a rating. If you're listening in or watching it on YouTube, also subscribe, leave a comment. Always appreciate that kind of stuff. But whatever it might be, you can also find us on social media like Knuckles and Gloves is on Facebook and Instagram. We're also individually on Instagram and on Twitter. On Twitter, my buddy Aris Pina is Punch Zone Aris, and on Twitter, I am Patrick M. Connor. Find us there. Aris, we'll talk soon, baby.
Absolutely, my man. Thanks,
Later, everybody.